You think you know the people closest to you. You believe the ones who share your home, your dinner table, your childhood memories, are exactly who they say they are. But what if one day, without warning, you discover that everything you believed about them was a carefully crafted lie? What if that person you called Dad lived a second life so dark, so twisted, that your entire world shattered the moment the truth came to light? Stay with me, because in the next few minutes, you're going to walk through a true story that unravels a father's hidden identity in the most chilling, unexpected, and horrifying way. This isn't just another crime story. It's a story that grabs you by the throat and forces you to question everything you know about trust, deception, and the terrifying secrets that can hide behind the most familiar face. Hey, I know you're here because something about this story caught your attention, and trust me, you're not going to leave without answers. This isn't one of those stories that drags you around in circles, leaving you more confused than when you started. I'm going to take you straight to the heart of this case. You're going to understand why this man's carefully hidden double life shocked everyone, from his own family to hardened detectives who thought they'd seen it all. But before we go too deep, I want you to pause for a second and really ask yourself, how well do you truly know the people around you? That question, that doubt, it's what makes this story hit home. And that's why you need to watch till the very end. Because the twist isn't just surprising, it's life-altering. You're not just going to be a viewer today, you're going to be a part of the emotional unraveling of one of the most disturbing cases we've ever covered. The story begins in a quiet suburb on the outskirts of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. It's the kind of neighborhood where people wave to each other while mowing their lawns, where birthdays are celebrated with barbecue cookouts and kids ride their bikes till the streetlights come on. And at the center of this neighborhood was the Campbell family, a seemingly ordinary, happy bunch. Tom Campbell, the father, was a respected local contractor, the kind of man who always showed up to help a neighbor fix a leaky roof or shovel snow off their driveway in the dead of winter. His wife, Jennifer, was the heart of the home, warm, kind, and deeply devoted to her kids. Together, they had 3 children, and by all accounts, their life was the kind people dream of. But dreams, as we'll soon uncover, can sometimes be carefully designed illusions. Tom wasn't just a father. He was a community man. He volunteered at the local church, coached Little League, and donated supplies to the local shelter every Thanksgiving. Everyone knew Tom. Everyone trusted Tom. And that's what makes this story all the more disturbing. Because what no one knew, not even his wife of 20 years, was that Tom was leading a double life. A life so different, so unrecognizably dark, it took a grisly discovery inside their own home for the truth to begin unraveling. And when the truth did surface, it didn't come in whispers or rumors. It exploded. It brought detectives, crime scene investigators, media vans, and a level of horror this neighborhood had never seen before. What was hidden behind that friendly smile was the stuff of psychological nightmares. Now, let's talk for a second. Not about Tom, but about you. If you're still watching, it means you felt that pull in your stomach, that deep curiosity mixed with unease. That's not just curiosity. That's your instinct reacting to something that feels too real, too possible. That's why this story matters. This isn't fiction. This is the raw, real-life unraveling of a carefully constructed lie. And I want you to imagine what it feels like to be one of Tom's children, coming home from school one day to find your house swarming with police, your mother crying uncontrollably, and your father nowhere to be found. What starts as confusion quickly becomes terror. And it's in that terrifying discovery that this story truly begins. Everything changed on a Friday afternoon. Jennifer was running errands and decided to come home early, just before picking up the kids. She expected to find the house empty. Instead, what she found was something so horrifying, it sent her screaming into the street. Neighbors rushed over. Calls were made. Within minutes, police were on the scene. What they discovered in the basement was not only shocking, it was incomprehensible. You see, Tom had built a second space beneath their home. It wasn't just a basement. It was a hidden room, sealed off and soundproofed, filled with things no family man should ever own. What was inside? Well, let's just say, it changed everything. It forced the police to dig deeper. It made the community question their own instincts. And it made the nation pay attention. We're talking evidence that pointed to years of deception. Stolen identities, hidden cameras, disguises, even links to missing persons from neighboring states. Authorities quickly realized this wasn't a simple case of a man hiding something shameful. It was the unmasking of a potential serial predator. And while all eyes were on the crimes themselves, the question that haunted everyone was, how did no one see this coming? How did a man live such a perfectly constructed double life for so long without raising a single red flag? But here's where it gets even more disturbing. As police began combing through the evidence, they found something chilling: recordings. Dozens of them. All labeled, categorized, and time-stamped. And what was on those tapes? It's what broke the detectives. These weren't just any recordings. They were documentation of Tom's secret activities, proof that he had been preparing for something bigger. Something no one saw coming. And just when investigators thought they'd seen the worst, they uncovered one final piece of evidence. One that changed the direction of the entire investigation. One that made even the most seasoned officers leave the room, shaken. One that revealed Tom's ultimate plan. One that was set to unfold in just a matter of days. Now I know what you're thinking. What exactly did they find? What was Tom really planning? And how close did he come to getting away with it? Believe me, I'm going to tell you everything. But you need to stay with me, because the next few minutes are going to twist and turn in ways you won't expect. We're diving deep into the psychological profile of a man who fooled everyone. His family, his friends, his entire community. We're going to hear from the investigators who broke the case, from the neighbors who still can't believe it, and from the victims who never even knew they were in danger. This story is more than a crime. It's a reflection of how easy it is to fall for appearances, how trauma can live in the shadows of the most picture-perfect homes, and how sometimes the darkest secrets are hidden in plain sight. I want you to imagine yourself in that house. Imagine finding out the person you trusted most had a locked room full of horrors just beneath your feet. That he wasn't the man you thought he was. That he was someone else entirely, someone dangerous. Someone capable of the unimaginable. And just when you think you've got a grip on the story, that's when everything turns. Because what they found in that hidden room wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Tom Campbell had always been a man of routines. Wake up at 6 a.m. sharp. Coffee, black, 2 sugars. Kiss on the cheek for Jennifer. Out the door by 6:45. From there, he'd hit the same construction sites, check in with the same clients, crack the same tired jokes with his crew over greasy diner lunches. On the surface, Tom's life was structured, predictable, safe. The kind of lifestyle that makes you trust someone by default. But as the investigators dug into his recent activities, a much stranger, more unsettling version of Tom began to take shape. Bank records showed cash withdrawals, large ones, taken out in small increments from multiple ATMs over several months. Surveillance footage placed him in neighborhoods hours away from home, places he had no business being in. Late-night visits to obscure hardware stores. Receipts for soundproofing materials, digital locks, even chains and restraints, all ordered discreetly, some under a false name. It was as if he'd spent years laying the groundwork for a reality that existed parallel to his family life, hidden, controlled, and dangerously well-organized. Jennifer, in the days following the discovery, was inconsolable. She gave interview after interview in complete disbelief, trying to make sense of what the police were telling her. She'd known Tom for over 2 decades. He was her high school sweetheart. They got married young, had kids young, built a life from the ground up. Not once did he raise his voice at her. Not once did he act violently. If anything, he was quiet, overly polite, maybe even too private, but never cruel. But now, with every new piece of evidence uncovered, the man she thought she married was unraveling into someone else entirely. Investigators began pulling his digital footprint, scanning emails, burner phones, encrypted files, all of which hinted at a level of secrecy far beyond a midlife crisis or harmless escapism. The things Tom had been researching, well, they were disturbing. Home abduction techniques, identity forgery, surveillance systems, even articles and forums on how to disappear without a trace. Despite the horrors found in that hidden room, authorities had to ask, was Tom acting alone? And that's when things got complicated. Because among his digital files, there were conversations, chats with usernames that couldn't be traced. Conversations that sounded more like planning than fantasy. The room's almost ready. She won't know a thing. 2 more days. These weren't just one-off comments. They were a pattern. Investigators suddenly found themselves looking not just at one man, but potentially a network of people. People who might still be out there. People who knew what Tom was doing. Maybe even people who had helped him do it. And that's where the case took its first unexpected twist. Just 2 days before the discovery, Tom had met with a man in a secluded gas station parking lot. Surveillance footage captured them exchanging a package from trunk to trunk. The footage was grainy, and the man's face obscured by a hat, but what stood out was the urgency. Tom looked nervous. The man, calm and deliberate. Was this an accomplice? A supplier? A blackmailer? Neighbors who once described Tom as the guy who'd give you the shirt off his back now admitted there were moments they brushed off as odd. The way he disappeared into the garage for hours. How he never invited anyone over for dinner, despite attending everyone else's. How Jennifer once mentioned that Tom had a man cave she'd never seen, a locked storage area he told her to stay out of because it was just tools and junk. A few even recalled a strange car parked across the street at odd hours, a dark sedan, engine running, lights off. At the time, no one questioned it. But now, those same neighbors were combing through old memories, trying to figure out if they had missed something more sinister. And then came the emails. One in particular stood out, a message Tom had drafted but never sent. It was short, cryptic, almost like a confession. It read, "I'm tired of pretending. If they find out, everything ends. But part of me wants them to. Part of me wants this over." That message triggered a whole new theory. Maybe Tom was on the verge of exposing himself. Maybe he was unraveling mentally. Maybe guilt, or fear of getting caught, was pushing him towards some kind of breaking point. But if that was the case, why the meeting at the gas station? Why the meticulous planning? Why the sense of urgency in those messages? As the mystery deepened, more names began surfacing. One of Tom's coworkers, a man named Gary Hess, had been abruptly fired 6 months prior and hadn't been seen since. Gary and Tom had worked side by side for years. They carpooled, shared lunch breaks, even went fishing together. But Gary's sudden disappearance, originally dismissed as a personal matter, was now under a spotlight. His last known address was abandoned. His phone disconnected. And when detectives checked the employee locker Gary once used, they found a notebook stuffed between the pipes behind it. Pages of diagrams. Notes. Directions. Timelines. A few pages even listed names, some of them real people. People who had recently gone missing. Was Gary part of whatever Tom was involved in? Or was he a victim? Had he gotten too close to something he didn't fully understand? And then came the most disturbing lead yet. One of the tapes found in the hidden room contained something that didn't match the others. It wasn't recorded in the Campbell house. The layout, lighting, and sound suggested a completely different location. In the background, faintly, a voice could be heard. Not Tom's. A second male voice, gravelly, older, giving instructions. It was almost like a training session. No mistakes. No names. No empathy. That tape changed everything. It meant Tom hadn't just acted with someone's knowledge. He had likely been taught, groomed, pulled into something much bigger than any of them could have imagined. Maybe this wasn't just a double life. Maybe this was a chain, a system, a sick network that went beyond the Campbell home. Every new piece of evidence pulled the story in a different direction. Was Tom a criminal mastermind, orchestrating a hidden life under his family's nose? Or was he a pawn, lured in, manipulated, and trapped in something he couldn't escape? Were the people he communicated with simply collaborators, or were they blackmailers, threatening to expose secrets he couldn't afford to have revealed? And what about Jennifer? Could she really have been that unaware? Or had she seen something years ago and chosen to forget it? Suppressed it? Denied it out of love or fear? The answers, so far, have only led to more questions. The deeper authorities dig, the darker it gets. And just when you think you've caught your breath, something else surfaces. A new witness. A missing report refiled with fresh details. An anonymous tip pointing to a remote cabin hours from Milwaukee. And that's where the story is headed next. Because what they found at that cabin was something no one was prepared for. By the time investigators made their way to the remote cabin, the pressure had started closing in from every angle. News outlets were spinning the story into a frenzy. Neighbors were either too scared or too ashamed to speak, and Jennifer, desperate for answers, was beginning to realize just how much of her life had been built on lies. The cabin itself was buried deep in the woods, far from the reach of cell service, tucked behind a forgotten dirt trail only visible through satellite images. The inside of the cabin was a jarring mix of chaos and intention. Dozens of photographs were pinned to the walls, faces of women, children, and families who looked eerily familiar. Many of them were missing persons from different states, some dating back years. Red string connected some of the images. Notes were scrawled in shorthand. But the most disturbing discovery was a locked chest, buried beneath a false floor panel. Inside it were tapes. Not copies, not backups, originals. Recordings of surveillance footage, secret interviews, confessions. And one of them was labeled with Jennifer's name. That was the moment everything changed. Because it suggested that she, too, was somehow connected to all of this, whether as a victim, an accomplice, or something far more complex. But just as authorities began cataloging the evidence, something went terribly wrong. The contents of the cabin were logged and tagged for transport, yet when they arrived at the forensic lab, the chest was gone. Vanished. No sign of forced entry in the transport van, no GPS errors, no missing personnel. It was as if it had never existed. And when they checked the backup security footage from the transport route, the entire hour of footage during the trip was missing, corrupted beyond recovery. Investigators immediately suspected an inside job. Someone had access. Someone didn't want the truth to come out. And then, out of nowhere, Jennifer received an anonymous email with no sender info, no IP trail. The subject line simply read, "Stop looking, or your children will pay the price." Authorities tightened security around the family, but Jennifer, now riddled with doubt and fear, began pulling away from the investigation altogether. She started asking fewer questions, canceled all interviews, and even refused to hand over her phone for further inspection. It didn't go unnoticed. Investigators began to wonder, had she already known? Or worse, had she been warned long before the police got involved? Her behavior became erratic. She claimed to hear noises at night, thought she was being followed. Her sister, who tried to check in on her one evening, found the door wide open and the alarm system disabled. But there were no signs of forced entry, and nothing was taken. It felt like a message, a scare tactic. Things took an even stranger turn when a former co-worker of Tom's, an electrician named Darren Mills, came forward with new information. He claimed Tom had once asked him for help wiring a second property, a different cabin, farther north, one that wasn't listed in any public records. Darren had refused the job because something about the request didn't sit right with him. Tom was too specific, too secretive. But now, with all this coming to light, Darren gave the investigators coordinates and agreed to help them identify the location. But before he could be brought in for formal questioning, Darren was found unconscious in his apartment, the result of an apparent overdose. His family swore he never used drugs. His toxicology showed traces of a synthetic compound not commonly available on the street. It was enough to confirm foul play, but not enough to trace where it came from. At this point, the narrative became nearly impossible to untangle. A second cabin, a missing chest of damning evidence, a whistleblower silenced, Jennifer's shifting behavior, and underneath it all, the gnawing suspicion that Tom's story didn't start in that hidden room. It started much earlier, with a betrayal no one saw coming. Investigators found an old, unsent letter in Tom's safe deposit box, addressed to someone named M. It was brief but loaded with weight. "You should have told me the truth before I got in too deep. Now I'm the one who has to carry this." You promised me it was just a game. But people are dying, and I can't stop it anymore. So, who was M? A mentor? A handler? A partner? Authorities scrambled to find any records linking Tom to someone with that initial, but nothing turned up. No financial records. No known associates. No emails. It was like M didn't exist or had been erased. Which is why, when an old photograph turned up showing Tom at a business conference 10 years earlier, standing next to a sharply dressed man with the name tag Miller, it reignited every theory investigators had buried. The man's face was oddly familiar to one of the detectives, who remembered him from a different case entirely. One that involved missing persons and an underground network no one had been able to prove existed. Now, they had a possible link. A face. A name. A thread to pull. But as they prepared to reopen that old case file, they received a message, a physical one this time, left on the windshield of the lead detective's car in the precinct parking lot. A single line, printed on aged paper. Keep digging, and you'll bury yourselves. And that's when they realized they weren't the only ones watching this unfold. Just when investigators thought the case couldn't grow more tangled, a new thread emerged, one that threw every assumption they had into a tailspin. As detectives pored over old connections, looking for ties between Tom and the mysterious man from the photo, a call came in from the Boston PD. A woman, Marla Hendricks, had reported receiving an envelope that bore striking similarities to the anonymous threat Jennifer received weeks earlier. No return address, no fingerprints, just a stark white envelope slid beneath her apartment door, even though she lived on the third floor of a secure building. Inside was a single photo. It showed Tom, younger, sitting in a diner booth across from a little boy. The timestamp in the corner said 2013. But the boy wasn't anyone known to investigators. He didn't match Tom's son, or anyone from Jennifer's family. And on the back of the photo, in faint red ink, were the words, "You're not the only one who forgot." The letter itself was more chilling than threatening. It simply read, "He lied to you too. Think back to that summer at Ridgeway." Marla was confused, shaken. She hadn't seen Tom in years, since college, in fact. They had dated briefly, but it had ended cleanly, or so she thought. They'd gone their separate ways, no contact, no drama. Yet now, over a decade later, she was being dragged into something that felt like a setup. When detectives asked why someone would think she was involved, she admitted something she'd never shared before, not even with her husband. That summer, the summer of Ridgeway, she and Tom had gone on a spontaneous road trip. She couldn't remember every detail, but she did recall him receiving strange calls, insisting they take detours to places that didn't make sense. One stop in particular stood out, a remote farmhouse in upstate New York. He told her it belonged to his uncle, but they never went inside. He just sat in the car, tense, watching the driveway. After nearly an hour, someone came out, handed him a box, and left without saying a word. Tom shoved the box into the trunk and never mentioned it again. Now, years later, Marla wasn't even sure if that person had really been a relative. When she told investigators about the box, their interest peaked. Because this wasn't just another weird memory, it matched the pattern of secrecy, of untraceable locations and coded behaviors they were seeing again and again. And suddenly, Ridgeway was on the map. Investigators searched property records for the area and found an old farmhouse deed registered under an alias connected to a defunct charity, one that had been shut down years ago for mismanagement of funds and suspected fraud. The name of the charity? Miller's Hands Foundation. It couldn't be a coincidence. Meanwhile, back in Jennifer's town, things were unraveling fast. Her children were moved to a safe house after another anonymous warning surfaced. This one slipped under their windshield wiper at the grocery store. It was a child's drawing. Scribbled in crayon was a figure standing in front of a burning house, holding hands with what appeared to be two children, while a third figure, larger, ominous, loomed in the background with a giant X through his face. At first glance, it seemed like nonsense. But when Jennifer's youngest daughter saw the drawing, she froze. "That's the dream I had last week," she whispered, her voice trembling. "That's the man in the woods." No one had told the children anything. Nothing about threats, nothing about the investigation. So, how could she have known? Investigators now faced a dilemma. Every lead they followed seemed to open new doors instead of closing old ones. The lines between victim and accomplice, witness and suspect, were growing blurrier by the minute. And when they traced a call from Marla's blocked number to a burner phone purchased at a gas station near Ridgeway just days earlier, things became even more suspect. Someone was watching her. Someone wanted her to remember, but only on their terms. And just as they were preparing to fly out to investigate the farmhouse, the fire report came in. The place had burned to the ground the night before their arrival. Cause unknown. The security footage from the only nearby gas station was wiped clean. But a single frame was salvageable. A man in a hooded jacket, walking away from the farmhouse just before midnight. He looked directly into the camera. And though the image was grainy, his face bore a striking resemblance to someone from Jennifer's past. The detectives didn't release the image right away. They wanted to be sure. But something was crystal clear. They weren't chasing a single monster. They were unraveling a network. One with layers, history, and possibly multiple operatives. This wasn't just about Tom anymore. This was bigger. Much bigger. And somewhere in the shadows, the real mastermind was watching and pulling the strings. Because when investigators cross-referenced the photo found in Marla's envelope with old social services files, a match popped up that no one expected, an adoption record flagged for irregularities. The boy in the photo was registered as missing in 2013 under a completely different name. And the name of the caseworker who filed the last update, Jennifer, had always been a rational person. As a caseworker, she'd faced hostile homes, erratic parents, and unpredictable outbursts from people at their worst. But nothing in her years of fieldwork prepared her for the gnawing dread she now carried with her like a shadow. It wasn't just that her ex-husband had a secret past. It wasn't just the cryptic letters or the strange, recurring appearances of symbols and drawings her children claimed to have dreamed about. It was the silence in between, the cold, hollow gaps where logic used to live. The feeling that every step she took was being watched, that even the walls in her own home weren't hers anymore. She tried brushing it off as stress. Maybe she was reading too much into things. Maybe trauma was distorting her perception. But that illusion shattered the moment her sister, Claire, vanished without a trace. Claire had been Jennifer's anchor, the one person who had stayed grounded, supportive, and fully invested in helping her piece together the terrifying puzzle. They spoke every day, checking in constantly, especially with Jennifer's mounting anxiety. But on a Wednesday morning, Claire simply didn't show up for work. Her phone rang unanswered. Her apartment was locked from the inside, her car still in the driveway, but she was gone. The coffee pot was still warm when police entered, her purse was on the kitchen counter, and a single message had been left on her laptop screen. She was never yours to protect. The words chilled Jennifer to her core. Who was she? Was it Claire? Her daughter? Herself? And why did it feel like the message was meant for her? That night, Jennifer didn't sleep. Her thoughts spiraled into the kind of fear she once used to talk other families through. She began to notice patterns she hadn't before: cars parked outside her home for hours, headlights dimmed, drivers unmoving. Emails she didn't remember sending appearing in her outbox. Her social media profiles accessed from unknown devices. Her children began waking up at 3:03 a.m. on the dot, crying, telling her about a man with no eyes who stood at the end of the hallway. At first, she chalked it up to stress-induced nightmares. But when she checked the baby monitor footage from her youngest's room, she found a 30-second gap. The screen went black just long enough for something or someone to slip in unnoticed. It wasn't just the children who were changing. Jennifer found herself second-guessing every memory she had of Tom. She began pulling boxes out of storage, digging through old photo albums, journals, mementos from the early days of their relationship. And what she found didn't match her recollection. Trips she remembered taking as a family had no photos of Tom. Letters she thought he wrote were in handwriting that now looked unfamiliar. Dates didn't align. Stories he told her about his childhood, his work, even how they met, contained subtle but significant inconsistencies. It was as if the man she had married had been playing a long, slow game of identity erosion. She no longer trusted what was real and what was a constructed version of her life. Then came the envelope. No stamp, no address, just a manila package left on her front porch, taped shut and marked "Play Me." Inside was an old voice recorder, the kind used by journalists and private investigators. With shaking hands, Jennifer hit play. At first, it was static. Then a familiar voice, her own, whispering, "He knows about Ridgeway. Don't trust the woman with the key." The recording ended. Her blood ran cold. She had no memory of ever recording those words. No recollection of that voice memo. Who was the woman with the key? Marla? Someone else? And if someone had access to her voice, her memories, what else had been manipulated? At this point, Jennifer knew she couldn't do it alone. She reached out to Detective Langley, the only officer who had truly taken her seriously from the beginning. But when she arrived at the precinct, she was met with confusion. Langley was gone, placed on leave. Internal Affairs had flagged him for misconduct just days earlier, claims of falsifying evidence, obstruction of justice, and failing to report key findings in the case. Jennifer was stunned. Langley had been thorough, relentless, the one person who seemed to want real answers. But now, he was just another thread unraveling from the story. As she left the station, she noticed someone watching her from across the street, a woman in a dark coat, standing perfectly still. When Jennifer turned to look again, the woman was gone. She began noticing symbols scratched into her mailbox, her fence, even the sidewalk in front of her house. Unfamiliar markings resembling a combination of letters and numbers. At first she thought it was graffiti, but they weren't random. Each one matched a case number from her files, cases she hadn't thought about in years. Cases that involved missing children. Children whose parents all shared a strange commonality. Now Jennifer was no longer just trying to solve a mystery. She was running for her life. Her home no longer felt safe. Her workplace was suspect. Her memories were no longer reliable. And the people she thought she could trust had either vanished, betrayed her, or proven to be something else entirely. With her sister gone, her children frightened, and her mind fraying under the weight of sleepless nights and unanswered questions, Jennifer was starting to break. And the worst part? She had a new envelope waiting on her porch the next morning. Only this time, there was no message inside. Every one of them had received state assistance from a foundation that no longer existed. Miller's hands. She pulled the names, the paperwork, and realized every one of those families had been referred to her by a single person. Someone from within her own agency. Someone who was still working there. Just a single photograph. A photo of her daughter, taken from outside the house. While she slept, the air was thick with questions, and Jennifer felt like she was being suffocated by the weight of not knowing. Every instinct screamed that she was being watched, tracked, toyed with, but the pieces still didn't quite click into place. Until that night. Until she opened her front door to find Tom, her supposedly dead ex-husband, standing on the porch, very much alive. No disguise, no fear, just a strange, calm expression on his face like he'd been expecting this moment all along. The man everyone believed had died in a fiery car crash was back, untouched, not a scar in sight. Jennifer's knees buckled beneath her as he simply said, "We need to talk. Everything you think you know is a lie." She wanted to slam the door in his face, wanted to scream and demand answers. But her body moved before her brain could catch up, and she let him in. Sitting across from him in the dimly lit living room felt surreal. This was the man she had grieved, the man whose ashes she scattered, the man whose death had launched a domino effect of horror. And now here he was alive, breathing, talking, explaining. He claimed he had faked his own death to protect the children, that he had uncovered something dark, something embedded deep within the very system they trusted. He said Miller's Hands wasn't just a nonprofit. It was a front, a recruitment channel for something far more sinister, an experimental social conditioning program run in cooperation with a rogue intelligence faction. They targeted vulnerable families, manipulating data, influencing behaviors, even planting false memories in children to test psychological compliance. Jennifer thought he had lost his mind. The more he spoke, the more insane it sounded, until he pulled out the original intake forms for a family she remembered vividly. A family she had documented years ago. But these papers, they had her name listed as the child's biological mother. Her name, her date of birth, even a forged signature. Jennifer had no memory of this family, no recollection of any connection beyond professional casework. But the details were too precise, too deliberate. As she flipped through the files, a cold realization crept in. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to embed her into a narrative that wasn't real. Or worse, had altered her own past in a way she couldn't recognize. Tom told her that's why he left. That once he realized what was happening, he knew staying meant putting them all at risk. His death had been orchestrated with the help of someone on the inside, a whistleblower who had since gone dark. Jennifer didn't know what to believe. But what shook her the most wasn't the files or the theories. It was the one photo he pulled from his coat pocket. It was a childhood picture of Jennifer herself. Only, in the corner, partially obscured by age and time, was the symbol, the same strange markings that had been carved into her mailbox, drawn in her children's dreams, scratched into every clue they'd followed. It was in the photo, from decades ago, before she had ever met Tom, before she had ever worked in child services. That moment shattered her. She had spent weeks trying to uncover what her ex-husband had hidden, fearing that his lies had put her family in danger. But now, she realized the real question wasn't what he had done, but what had been done to both of them. The conspiracy didn't begin with Tom. It began with her. Her own past had been manipulated. Her own memories, perhaps rewritten. The threat she feared wasn't stalking her from the outside. It had been inside her life, her story, maybe even her mind, all along. But just as Tom began to say more, just as he reached for another envelope, the window behind him shattered in a violent explosion of glass and smoke. Jennifer was thrown to the floor, ears ringing, vision spinning. When she scrambled to her feet, Tom was gone. The room was empty except for the faint sound of tires screeching away and the thick, choking haze of a smoke grenade. On the floor, where he had been sitting, was the envelope, burned at the edges, but still intact. She picked it up with trembling hands, opened it, and found one single note inside, typed in all caps. Jennifer sat alone at the kitchen table, the charred edges of the envelope still flaking onto her hands as she tried to breathe through the panic threatening to pull her under. Every instinct screamed at her to stop, to run, to protect her children and disappear. But she knew she couldn't, not now. Not with everything she'd uncovered. Whatever truth she was circling around wasn't just about her, or Tom, or the haunting mark that seemed burned into her life. It went deeper, and if the warning was right, if someone had erased her past for a reason, then the only way out was through. Still, knowing that didn't make the next decision any easier, especially when it involved confronting the one person who had been her anchor through this nightmare, her sister, Natalie. Natalie had been the first person Jennifer called when the letters started, the one who watched the kids when things got overwhelming, the one who comforted her when she cried in the middle of the night, certain she was losing her grip. And yet, for weeks now, things hadn't sat right. Natalie knew too much. She always showed up before Jennifer had to ask. She had keys to the house but insisted she never used them. And when Jennifer brought up the symbol, showed her the photo from her childhood, Natalie had brushed it off too quickly, too casually, like someone trying to hide just how much they actually knew. It was a betrayal Jennifer didn't want to believe, but when she hacked into Natalie's laptop that morning, fueled by desperation and dread, she found a trail of encrypted messages. Messages between Natalie and someone only referred to as Handler. Jennifer's blood ran cold as she read the timestamps. The messages dated back nearly a year. Well before Tom's death. Well before the nightmares started. One in particular stood out. It was from 3 months ago, the day after Jennifer's youngest had that violent sleep episode and woke up screaming about the man with no eyes. The message read, Subject experienced Phase 3 dream infiltration. Monitor emotional shifts. Do not intervene unless the subject begins to remember. It was impossible to breathe. Her children were subjects? Dream infiltration? Natalie had been monitoring them? Jennifer felt like her skin was crawling with invisible threats, the air around her too tight, too controlled. She slammed the laptop shut, heart racing, and paced the room as rage and confusion battled for space inside her. That's when her phone buzzed with an unknown number. The voice on the other end was calm, detached, and terrifying in its clarity. They knew where she was. They knew about the envelope. They knew she had accessed Natalie's computer. And they offered her one way out. "All you have to do," the voice said, "is forget again. Walk away. The children will be safe. Your memories will be restored to baseline. You'll live peacefully. But if you continue to pursue this, if you push your mind past the threshold again, we won't intervene. And you won't survive what you'll find." Jennifer stood frozen in the middle of her kitchen, realizing the price of the truth wasn't just pain, it was obliteration. The choice was brutal. Protect her children's safety by erasing everything, by pretending none of this had ever happened, or press forward into a storm that might destroy her and leave her children in even greater danger. Her hands trembled as she looked at her kids playing quietly in the other room, oblivious to the storm brewing around them. Could she really choose ignorance over truth? Safety over freedom? The door opened, and Natalie stepped inside like nothing had changed. She smiled, holding a bag of groceries, eyes warm, voice light. "Hey," she said. "You okay? You look pale." Jennifer couldn't speak. She just stared at the sister who might have sold her out, who might have helped rewrite her life, who might have been part of the reason she couldn't trust her own memories. The silence stretched thick between them, and Natalie's smile faded, replaced by something unreadable. Something that made Jennifer's skin crawl. "You found something," Natalie said, setting the bag down slowly. "Didn't you?" The walls seemed to close in. Jennifer had never been more certain that the person standing in front of her knew everything and might be capable of anything. She thought about her children, about Tom's warning, about the symbol from her childhood photo, about the memories she didn't even know she was missing. And then, without warning, Natalie said something that shattered the last remnants of Jennifer's world. "You're not supposed to remember who you were before the program." Jennifer's heart stopped. Everything tilted. And she knew she couldn't walk away now. Not without knowing what she had forgotten. Not without knowing who she truly was. The truth didn't just crawl out from the shadows. It exploded into Jennifer's world like a grenade, tearing through every illusion she thought she could still hold on to. The revelation that she had once been part of something called the program was horrifying enough. But when Natalie opened the file, the one stored under a false system folder on her laptop, behind 3 layers of encryption, Jennifer cracked out of sheer adrenaline. There was no turning back. It wasn't just Jennifer. There were dozens of names. Hundreds. An entire network of people, their identities altered, families rewritten. Entire timelines manipulated like pieces in some monstrous psychological chess game. The file wasn't just a log, it was a blueprint. Case numbers, dates of Phase 1 induction, photographs of people Jennifer recognized from her life, her old co-workers, her neighbors, her children's school principal, even her late husband Tom. It wasn't a coincidence he was gone. It wasn't a random tragedy. It was part of the design. Her breath caught when she found his name next to hers, both tagged with an old medical facility address that had been shut down for over a decade. Joint subject testing, cognitive fracture trials, memory loop analysis. And beneath that, a horrifying sentence. Subject 117 showed resistance during deprogramming. Final extraction approved. She wanted to scream, to cry. But the world didn't stop for grief. Not anymore. That's when the message came through. It wasn't just text, it was a video. Live feed. A grainy shot of her kids sitting in their classroom. Happy. Laughing. And then, a message appeared across the bottom of the screen. Keep digging, and they disappear. Jennifer dropped the phone. Her hands shook so violently, she nearly hit the floor. They were watching her, her kids, everyone. She couldn't trust anyone. She couldn't go to the police. Some of the officers in the file were flagged as covert participants. Even her therapist from years ago had notes listed under compliance observer. It was a level of control that made her feel like she'd never actually lived a day on her own terms. Everything had been curated, monitored, scripted. And now that she was off script, they were willing to burn it all down just to keep her quiet. Natalie confessed, in her own panicked way. She had been recruited after Jennifer's second breakdown. Told it was to help Jennifer recover, to protect the children. Promised they were doing something vital for the future of cognitive science. Something that would help veterans, trauma survivors, people with deep psychological scars. But none of it was true. The program wasn't about healing. It was about control. Erasing trauma didn't cure people, it made them easier to manage. And Jennifer, apparently, had once been their most successful trial. Until she broke through. "You were the only one who started remembering," Natalie whispered. "And once you did, they couldn't let it spread." Jennifer couldn't process it all, not fully. The ground was shifting beneath her, reality twisting into something unfamiliar and sickening. She had spent years trying to make sense of the empty spaces in her memories, the strange déjà vu, the flashes of unfamiliar places in her dreams. But now it all made sense. She wasn't paranoid. She wasn't broken. She had been manipulated, reprogrammed. And every person who smiled at her like nothing was wrong had been complicit or too scared to tell her the truth. The urgency became unbearable. She had to get the kids out. She had to find a place to run. She had to disappear before they made good on their threat. But just as she started to pack bags, to destroy phones, to erase digital traces, the power cut out. Every light in the house died. Her laptop screen blinked black. Her phone dropped from 78% to 0. The house was silent. And then came the knock at the door, a single soft knock. Followed by another. And a voice. "I need you to listen carefully, Jennifer," the man said. "I'm not here to hurt you. But you've been lied to. Natalie didn't tell you everything." It wasn't a stranger. It was Tom. Alive. Standing at her front door. Drenched in rain. Eyes hollow. Beard grown in. Body thinner than she remembered, but unmistakably him. Jennifer's world shattered all over again. If he was alive, then what had they done to her memory? What had they told her children? And more terrifyingly, what had they done to him to make him disappear? As the door slowly creaked open, Jennifer's mind spun. Nothing made sense anymore. And everything she thought she knew, was about to change forever. Jennifer stared at the man she once buried, unsure whether to run, scream, or collapse in disbelief. Tom stood in the doorway like a ghost returned, the storm behind him soaking his clothes and washing mud across the porch. His eyes, those same eyes she'd memorized and mourned, held something else now. Not relief. Not recognition. Something colder. Hardened. But still, undeniably him. He stepped inside, dripping and silent, and Jennifer locked the door behind him out of instinct, even though every muscle in her body screamed not to. She couldn't process what was happening fast enough. "They're not just watching us," he said. "They're inside us. All of us." She understood about the mystery that had devoured her life. His presence short-circuited everything she thought. His words didn't register at first. But then, he pulled up his sleeve, revealing a thin scar running the length of his forearm. Embedded beneath the skin, barely visible in the flickering candlelight, was a faint metallic shimmer. An implant. "They call it the Shepherd Protocol," Tom said. "It's how they track thoughts. Control emotional response. Adjust memory patterns remotely. Every subject from the program has one, including you. Including the kids." Jennifer backed away, her pulse pounding. She had spent months trying to claw her way to the truth, and now, standing in front of her, was the very man who supposedly died because of it. And he wasn't here to embrace her. He wasn't here to protect her. He was here because something much larger was about to unfold, and she was somehow at the center of it. Tom explained that after his disappearance, he'd been part of Phase 2, forced into a deeper version of the experiment that expanded beyond memory manipulation. It involved full behavioral rerouting, thought suppression, identity overwrite. He had been reprogrammed, just like her, but something in his conditioning broke. A flaw. A memory they couldn't erase. And for the past year, He'd been faking compliance, slowly pulling pieces together while pretending to be someone else entirely. He knew they would use Jennifer as bait, that the program was failing, that too many subjects were remembering. And you were the first to resist fully. That's why they needed you out of the picture. That's why Natalie, he stopped. She didn't betray you. Not at first. They got to her. Jennifer's knees buckled, but she didn't fall. She clenched her jaw, grounding herself in the last piece of control she had. Why now? She asked. Why come back now? Tom looked toward the kids' room, then back at her. Because they've activated the purge sequence. Jennifer didn't need him to explain. She could feel it. The ticking clock, the weight of the storm, the strange static in her ears. The program had run its course. Too many variables. Too many subjects breaking free. Now they were cutting ties. Erasing evidence. Erasing people. They had less than 12 hours. The climax came not with gunfire or explosions, but in a cold, sterile lab beneath an abandoned warehouse, one of the last nodes of the original facility. Jennifer and Tom found it using GPS coordinates buried in one of the encrypted files Natalie had decoded before she vanished. Inside, rows of servers hummed, lights blinking in rhythmic pulses. And at the center of it all, the master console, locked behind biometric security. The final piece of the puzzle. The source of it all. It was there that Jennifer met the architect of the Shepherd Protocol. Not a government agent. Not a military officer. But a calm, collected woman in a white lab coat, Dr. Evelyn Mercer, Jennifer's former therapist. She stepped from the shadows like a director returning to oversee her final act. You were always my best subject, Evelyn said, her voice eerily warm. So intuitive. So defiant. I try to tell them you'd never stay broken for long. Jennifer's mind snapped. This woman had guided her through her darkest moments. Pretended to help her heal, all while feeding her lies and testing her reactions like she was a lab rat in a glass maze. Jennifer demanded answers, demanded to know why. Why her? Why any of them? Dr. Mercer didn't flinch. Because the world is broken. And people like you, we needed to know if it was possible to rewire pain. To rewrite grief. Imagine a society where no one remembers loss. No PTSD. No trauma. Just clean slates. Every morning. Every life reset. That's what we were building. A better humanity. But we're not machines, Jennifer said through gritted teeth. You took away our choices. You would have chosen pain? Mercer asked. Jennifer looked at Tom, then back at her. I would have chosen the truth. And that's when the final twist hit. Tom moved toward the console and placed his hand on the scanner. The lock disengaged. Not Jennifer's hand. His. Jennifer turned to him, betrayal blooming in her chest. I didn't come back to stop them, Tom whispered. I came back to finish it. In that moment, she understood. Tom had never broken free. He was part of the purge, sent to activate the failsafe from within, and she, desperate for answers, for connection, had delivered him right to the heart of it. But as the servers whirred to life, a second screen illuminated behind the main terminal. Subject 117. Override enabled. Jennifer had triggered her own backup protocol, buried deep in her subconscious, installed during a forgotten session in therapy years ago. A code, a phrase, even she hadn't known she possessed until now. The moment Tom touched the system, she had counterhacked the purge sequence. Mercer screamed. The lab went dark. And when he finally spoke, it wasn't with comfort or apology. It was with purpose. With finality. A timer began to count down. And as sirens blared, doors slammed shut, and security lights flashed crimson, Jennifer stared at Tom with a final, bitter clarity. You should have killed me when you had the chance, she said. And then, everything exploded into chaos. When the smoke cleared and the fire suppression system hissed its last breath, Jennifer stumbled out of the wreckage, covered in soot, blood, and the residue of what once was her entire identity. Emergency crews descended hours later, responding not to a 911 call. Those lines had long since been rerouted by the program, but to seismic activity that registered as a minor earthquake beneath the surface of the city. The warehouse had collapsed in on itself, sealing away decades of secrets in concrete and steel. No bodies were recovered. No evidence remained. Just Jennifer, silent and barely conscious, found half-buried beneath twisted beams and fractured memories. They labeled her a survivor of a structural accident. They treated her for trauma and smoke inhalation. No one asked what she was doing there. No one asked what she knew. And for the first time in months, she didn't offer answers. It took weeks before she could sleep through the night without jolting awake in terror, and even longer before she stopped glancing over her shoulder, expecting someone or something to pull her back into the nightmare. Natalie was never found. Her last known address, now an abandoned shell of a home filled with static-filled TVs and burned-out light bulbs. Tom, if he ever truly existed beyond the construct they forced into her life, was gone. Whether he'd perished in the explosion or escaped into another identity like the ones they programmed into their subjects, Jennifer would never know. But in a way, it didn't matter. Because what he represented, control, manipulation, betrayal, was a ghost she'd learned to stop chasing. The program was gone. Or at least, it had been buried deep enough to stop hunting her for now. Jennifer moved to a small coastal town, one with no cameras at traffic lights and no tech startups advertising brainwave optimization. She took a job at a used bookstore, where paper still ruled and nothing beeped when you turn the page. Some days, when the weather turned gray and the wind howled like it had that night she first saw Tom return from the dead, she'd wonder if the world really went back to normal, or if she'd simply been allowed to step off the grid as a variable no longer worth tracking. Because the truth was, while she destroyed that specific facility, she hadn't taken down the network. The Shepard protocol was only one iteration, one experiment. The files Natalie decrypted hinted at more projects running in different cities, under different names, targeting different kinds of pain. Still, Jennifer didn't chase them. Not anymore. She had learned that some battles end not in victory or defeat, but in survival. And for her, surviving meant remembering. Holding on to pain, not as a burden, but as proof that she was still real. That she had chosen truth, no matter how jagged or cruel it might be. In her new life, she made friends who didn't know her past, neighbors who didn't ask questions, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, she wasn't performing for someone else's dataset. She just lived. Quietly. Deliberately. Human. But one morning, months later, while shelving books in the back room, Jennifer found an envelope that hadn't been there the night before. It was unmarked, sealed with a fingerprint pressed into wax. Inside was a single sentence typed in bold font on textured paper. Not all subjects stayed buried. There was no signature, no return address, just the echo of a nightmare she thought she'd outrun. And in that moment, the audience is left to wonder, was this truly the end of her journey, or just the next chapter in a story far bigger than she could ever imagine? As the screen fades to black, questions linger. How much of our reality is truly ours? How far would we go to forget pain, and what would we risk to remember? For viewers searching YouTube for answers to the trending mystery that had captivated their imaginations, brainwashing experiments gone wrong, memory manipulation government conspiracy, real-life MKUltra survivor stories, this ending doesn't just offer resolution. It forces a reckoning. Because if Jennifer could be watched, altered, broken, and rebuilt without ever knowing it, maybe so could anyone. Maybe so could you.